My name is Isabelle. I'm 30 years old and I live in Denver, Colorado. Snow had just started falling outside my apartment window when my phone buzzed that morning, a single message from my mother lighting up the screen. This year, just your sister's family. Keeping it small. 9 words, cold, polite, and final. I read them twice, maybe 3 times, waiting for a second text that never came. We'll miss you. No, maybe next time. Just silence. The kind of silence that wraps around your chest and squeezes until breathing feels like a chore. It wasn't the first time they'd pushed me aside during the holidays. But something about that message felt different, like the final confirmation of something I'd always known deep down. I was never part of their family table. I set the phone down and stared out the window, watching snow gather on the railing, each flake catching the faint glow of the streetlight. Across the street, I could see a family bringing home a Christmas tree, laughter, red scarves, a father lifting his daughter so she could reach the top branch. That used to be what I thought Christmas meant: warmth, togetherness, belonging. But somewhere along the way, the word family had become something sharp, something that cut. Every memory seemed to echo that single pattern: my sister Chloe at the center, golden and adored, and me standing just outside the circle, clapping for her from the shadows. For years I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I was busy, that I had outgrown the need for their approval. But the truth? It still hurt, like being the only one left outside in the snow, while everyone else sat by the fire. I poured myself a cup of coffee, let the steam fog my glasses, and thought about what it meant to be kept out. Maybe this time, I didn't have to wait for an invitation that would never come. Maybe I could build something new, something mine. Most people don't know this, but 2 years ago, after I sold my company, I bought a ranch in Aspen. $5 million worth of quiet acres of pine trees, a frozen lake that glitters like glass at dawn, and a long oak dining table carved by hand. I built it not to impress anyone, but because I wanted a place where people could feel seen, welcomed, safe. I never posted photos of it online, not even my family knew it existed. Until now, it had been my secret world, a reminder that life could be beautiful, even after rejection. That morning, I made a decision. If they wanted to keep it small, I would make it bigger. I would host my own Christmas. Not for revenge, not for show, but for everyone who had ever been left out of the picture, the cousins who were never invited, the friends who had nowhere to go, the ones who'd been made to feel like they didn't belong. This year, I wouldn't sit in silence. I would set the table myself. So, I picked up my phone again, not to reply to my mother, but to start a new conversation entirely, a different kind of family, born from kindness, not blood. As I drafted the first message, I caught my reflection in the glass. Calm, certain, no longer the forgotten girl from Indiana. Just a woman who finally realized she didn't need permission to exist. And maybe that's where my story begins, not with their rejection, but with my decision. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do after being pushed aside is to stop waiting for a seat and build your own table instead. Have you ever been pushed aside by your family and wondered what would happen if, just once, you chose yourself? Maybe that's where my story begins, with the moment I stopped waiting for their approval. But to understand why that message from my mother hit me so hard, you have to know what it felt like to grow up in our house in Indiana, where love wasn't shared, it was ranked. My sister, Chloe, was the sun of our family. Everything revolved around her: her laughter, her trophies, her perfectly curled hair. Even the air seemed to change when she walked into a room, like everyone unconsciously held their breath so she could shine brighter. I was just Chloe's sister. That was my name at school, at church, even at family gatherings. Not Isabelle, not me. Just a shadow, an afterthought, a reference point for someone else's glory. I remember one Christmas when I was 14, the year it finally sank in. Snow was falling heavy outside, the kind that makes the world quiet. Our living room glowed with soft gold light. Mom had spent days wrapping gifts in red ribbon and silver paper. Chloe sat by the tree in her new green sweater, eyes wide as Dad handed her a big box. Inside was a brand new laptop, sleek, silver, the one she'd been hinting about for weeks. The whole room clapped when she turned it on. Grandma said, "You deserve it, sweetheart." Mom smiled proudly. And I sat there, waiting. There was no second box, no ribbon with my name on it. Just a folded sweater on the couch beside me, one size too big, with a tag that said sale, 40% OFF. Mom said, "We didn't want you to feel left out," and went back to taking pictures of Chloe. I laughed, pretended it was fine. But I remember staring at the reflection of the tree lights on the window and realizing that in every photo, I was never really in the picture. I was just there, blurred in the background, holding the camera or standing too far to the side. That night, during dinner, they set up 2 tables like they always did, one for the adults and one for the kids. Chloe, of course, sat with the adults. I was told there wasn't enough room, so I squeezed between my younger cousins, cutting turkey for them while laughter erupted from the big table across the room. I could see my mother pouring wine, my father telling stories, Chloe tossing her hair, basking in the glow of it all. And for a moment I thought, maybe if I smiled hard enough, they'd invite me over. But the invitation never came. I don't think anyone meant to be cruel. That's the strange thing about favoritism, it doesn't always look like hate, it looks like forgetting. Forgetting to look your way, to say your name, to make space for your chair. It's the silence that hurts more than any insult ever could. And that Christmas, as I cleared plates while Chloe opened another gift, I made myself a quiet promise. One day, I would never have to ask for a seat at anyone's table again. Back then, I didn't know what that would mean. I didn't know it would take me years, states, and a life I'd have to build from the ground up. But I knew one thing as clear as the frost on that window. I was done being the forgotten sister. The girl whose light no one saw. And maybe, without realizing it, that's when I began building, not with bricks or money, but with determination. Every cold Christmas since then, every polite smile, every "we're so proud of Chloe" only added another layer to the foundation of the woman I'd become. The one who no longer waited by the door for anyone to call her name. That promise I made at 14 followed me into my teenage years like a quiet echo, a reminder that if no one else would see me, I'd have to make myself visible in my own way. While Chloe was out at cheer practice, surrounded by cameras and applause, I spent my evenings in the garage. It wasn't much: a cracked concrete floor, a flickering bulb, and the smell of oil and cold metal. But it was mine. The hum of circuits, the click of tools, the whir of an old fan became the closest thing I had to music. I'd sit cross-legged on the floor, taking apart broken radios and discarded computers that Dad's office threw away, reassembling them piece by piece until they came back to life. Each spark felt like proof that I could create something from nothing, that I wasn't invisible to the universe, even if I was to my family. Sometimes I'd call out, "Mom, it's working," hoping she'd come see. But usually, I'd just hear her voice drifting from the kitchen, saying, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to help Chloe rehearse for another dance routine. It was always "that's nice." The kind of phrase that sounds kind but lands hollow. Like a period instead of an exclamation mark. When Chloe won something, a cheerleading competition, a beauty pageant, even most liked in the school yearbook, Mom threw a party. Balloons, cake, family photos, neighbors coming over. But when I won the state science fair, Dad forgot to show up, and Mom texted me from the car, "So proud, sweetie, don't forget to thank your teachers." That was it. No dinner, no hug, not even a photo to remember it by. That night, I sat alone in the garage, my blue ribbon lying next to a half-built motherboard. Outside, laughter floated in from the living room where Chloe was showing her new cheer routine to our parents. I stared at the dull glow of the single bulb above me and wondered, how can light feel so cold? I had thought success would change something, that it would finally make them look at me. But all it did was highlight how far away I really was. Still, I kept building. I saved every dollar I earned, fixing old gadgets for neighbors, radios, microwaves, even lawnmowers. Mr. Lewis from next door started calling me the little engineer. He was probably the first adult who ever looked me in the eye and said, "You're good at this, kid." I carried those words like armor. Because at home, silence was louder than any praise. Chloe's world was painted in color, her friends coming over in bright cheer uniforms, the smell of hairspray and glitter filling the hallway. Mine was shades of gray, wires, soldering smoke, and the constant buzz of an old radio tuned slightly off frequency. I used to wonder what it would feel like to have someone look at me the way Dad looked at Chloe when she stepped onto a stage. To hear him clap and say, "That's my girl." But I never did. And eventually, I stopped expecting it. The garage became more than a place, it was my sanctuary, my laboratory, my confessional. I'd stay there until late at night, my hands covered in grease, headphones in, sketching circuit diagrams on the back of old notebooks. Sometimes, when it got too quiet, I'd whisper to myself, "You matter, Isabelle, you matter," just to hear the words spoken out loud, because no one else ever did. One evening, Chloe burst into the garage, rolling her eyes. "You're seriously still doing that? No one cares about your little robot stuff." She laughed, grabbed a soda from the shelf, and left. I stared at the empty doorway for a long time after she was gone, her laughter echoing down the hall. She didn't mean to be cruel, she just didn't understand that for me, those machines were the only things that ever listened. The following week, Mom spent 3 days preparing for Chloe's cheer banquet. The house smelled of cinnamon and frosting, every corner decorated with gold and red. My name wasn't mentioned once. I remember sitting on the stairs, watching through the railing as Chloe posed for photos in her glittering uniform, everyone chanting her name. The flash from the camera caught her face bright, golden, and for a second, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind her. Faded. Half-lit. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. Later that night, after the guests had gone home, I crept back into the garage. I turned off the overhead light and let the dark settle around me. Only the faint glow from the soldering iron cut through the shadows. I think that's when the thought first came to me, quiet but sharp. Am I really the unnecessary child? The one born just to fill the background of someone else's story? The next morning, Dad found me asleep on the floor, curled up beside a half-finished circuit board. He looked down, sighed, and said, "You should spend more time outside, Isabelle. It's not healthy sitting here all day." Then he closed the door and left. He never saw the small motor next to me, still humming softly, the only thing in that house that ever stayed running because of me. Years later, when I walked across the Stanford campus for the first time, I'd think about that garage, the shadows, the cold air, the hum of unfinished machines. It was where I first learned that solitude could be a teacher, that sometimes the darkness you're forced into becomes the very place you start building light. But back then, I was still a girl trying to prove she belonged in a house that had already chosen its favorite. So I kept fixing things. Broken radios, cracked screens, tangled wires, all the little things no one else bothered to save. Maybe I thought if I could fix enough of them, I could fix the silence too. But no matter how many machines I brought back to life, the house stayed the same, bright for Chloe, dim for me. Still, somewhere between the static of the radios and the hum of the old computers, a seed was planted, the idea that creation could be my language, my way out. I didn't know it yet, but those nights in the garage would become the blueprint of the life I was destined to build. The kind of life where no one could ever again look at me and say, "You're unnecessary." When the acceptance letter from Stanford arrived, it didn't feel real at first. The envelope was thick, crisp, with my name printed neatly in black ink, Isabelle Carter. I held it for a long moment before daring to open it, afraid that if I breathed too hard, the dream would vanish. When I finally unfolded the paper and read the words, "Congratulations, we are pleased to offer you a full scholarship to Stanford University," my vision blurred. It was the moment every kid dreams about, proof that all those late nights in the garage had meant something. That someone, somewhere, had finally seen me. I ran downstairs, heart racing, letter in hand. Mom was sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone, while Chloe was trying on a new outfit for senior pictures. "Mom," I said, breathless. I got in, Stanford with a full scholarship. I waited for her face to light up, for the hug, the tears, the pride. Instead, she frowned slightly and said, "Stanford? That's all the way in California, isn't it? That's so far from home." Are you sure that's practical? Dad looked up from the newspaper, adjusted his glasses, and added, "It's a long flight, honey. Maybe you should consider something closer. Indiana University has a great program, and you could still visit on weekends." I stood there, holding the letter, feeling the air deflate around me. I had expected excitement, celebration, maybe, even the kind of proud chaos Chloe always got when she achieved something. But there was nothing. Just the sound of Chloe snapping another selfie in the background, her reflection glowing in the mirror while I stood invisible beside her. "I worked really hard for this," I said quietly. "It's one of the best schools in the country." Mom smiled politely. "Of course, sweetie, we're happy for you. Just don't rush into anything. It's a big world out there." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the letter on the nightstand glowing faintly under the lamp. It's a big world out there. The words weren't meant to be cruel, but they carried a weight as if the world was too big for me, as if they couldn't imagine me belonging in it. 2 months later, I was packing. One suitcase, one backpack, one laptop, that was all I had. Chloe was moving into her sorority house at Purdue, and Mom was helping her shop for decor. I folded my clothes in silence. The garage, once my refuge, stood empty now. My soldering tools were packed away, the shelves bare. I could still smell the faint trace of metal and oil, the scent of every late night I'd spent trying to prove I mattered. The morning I left, the sun was barely up. Dad loaded my single suitcase into the trunk, sighing as if it were a chore. Mom hugged me quickly, her arms stiff, her perfume sharp and distant. "Call us when you get there," she said. "And text Chloe if you need advice. She's good with people." That last line stung more than she realized. As we drove away from the house, I looked out the window at the frost-covered fields of Indiana. Rows of corn stubble stretched to the horizon, pale and endless. That was home, predictable, quiet, small. I pressed my forehead against the glass and tried to picture California, palm trees, sunlight, the ocean. A place where no one knew who Chloe was, where I wouldn't just be someone's sister. When the plane lifted off, I felt a strange weight drop from my chest. Beneath the hum of the engines, I realized I wasn't just leaving a place, I was leaving a version of myself behind. The one who kept waiting for approval that would never come. Landing in California felt like stepping into a different universe. The air was warm, filled with salt and promise. The Stanford campus looked like something out of a dream. Sandstone buildings, courtyards lined with palm trees, students riding bikes with notebooks tucked under their arms. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was intruding. I was supposed to be there. Still, the first few weeks were harder than I expected. I didn't know anyone. My roommate came from a family of doctors who sent her care packages every week. Mine sent a text that said, "Don't forget to study." Sometimes, when the campus got quiet at night, I'd walk past the engineering building and press my hands against the glass, watching the glow of computer screens inside. I missed the hum of my garage, the comfort of building things alone. But I also knew I'd never go back. One evening, after a long lab session, I sat under a tree near the main quad, the same letter from Stanford folded in my jacket pocket. I unfolded it again, tracing my name with my thumb. Isabelle Carter. It still looked unfamiliar, like the name of someone I hadn't fully become yet. For the first time, I didn't feel like Chloe's sister. I felt like someone who had earned her own place in the world, even if no one back home would ever understand it. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Home is not where you're born, it's where you are seen." And, though I didn't know it then, that single line would guide me for years through every setback, every silence, every victory. When winter break came around, my classmates talked excitedly about flying home for Christmas. I told them I'd be staying on campus. "Don't you miss your family?" one girl asked. I smiled and said, "I miss the idea of them." As I watched the campus empty and the lights flicker on in the empty dorm halls, I felt that old ache return, the one that started years ago by a Christmas tree in Indiana. But this time, it didn't hollow me out. It fueled me. Because I realized something crucial. I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The girl who once waited for permission had stepped into the world on her own. And though I still carried the hurt of being unseen, I also carried the first spark of something stronger, the knowledge that I could build a life no one could take from me. The house I left behind was small, predictable, and full of closed doors. Stanford was the opposite: wide, golden, open. And, somewhere between those two places, between the frozen silence of Indiana and the warm light of California, I began to understand what freedom really felt like. It wasn't loud or grand. It was quiet, like exhaling after years of holding your breath. California taught me what freedom was, but it also taught me what survival meant. After graduation, the dream of Stanford turned quickly into the reality of rent, bills, and endless uncertainty. I stayed in Palo Alto for a while, working odd jobs just to keep the lights on: coffee shops, tech support shifts, even tutoring high school kids in math on weekends. The apartment I rented wasn't really an apartment. It was more like a closet with a window. The bed was an air mattress, the kitchen a hot plate, and a sink that hissed every time I turned the handle. Most nights, I ate instant noodles and worked under the pale glow of a secondhand desk lamp. There were weeks I couldn't afford groceries, so I volunteered at a local lab to have access to free cafeteria meals. The security guard there used to joke that I lived at the lab, and in some ways, he wasn't wrong. I'd stay until 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, soldering wires, sketching diagrams, writing code on borrowed computers. I didn't know exactly what I was building, but I knew I wanted to make something that mattered, something that could outlive the silence I grew up in. At first, I tried applying for jobs at tech companies, sending out hundreds of resumes. No one called back. My degree looked impressive, but I didn't have connections, mentors, or a last name that opened doors. One night, after another rejection email, I walked down to the small diner near my apartment and ordered the cheapest coffee they had. The waitress, an older woman named Marlene, refilled my cup without asking and said, "You look like someone who's gonna start her own thing one day. People who've been overlooked usually do." I smiled, but I didn't believe her then. It wasn't until months later that her words came back to me. I had been helping a classmate's uncle repair tracking software for hospital supply chains during flu season. It was clunky, inefficient, and outdated. Every minute delayed meant real consequences for patients. That night, I stayed up sketching an idea: a streamlined logistics platform using predictive algorithms to prevent shortages. I didn't have money, but I had time, and I had the stubborn kind of hope that only comes from having nothing left to lose. I named it Medlink, short for Medical Logistics Network. I built the prototype in a co-working space that smelled like burnt coffee and failed startups. My office was a folding chair near the vending machine. I maxed out 2 credit cards to buy cloud servers and borrowed a friend's laptop when mine overheated. For 2 years, I pitched to investors who smiled politely and said, "You're impressive, but maybe get a co-founder with more experience." Translation: someone with more money, someone who doesn't look like you. Still, I kept building. I survived on caffeine and grit. There were nights I cried over the code, thinking about that garage back in Indiana, how the hum of those broken machines had once kept me company. Now, it was the hum of the servers that filled the silence. Every setback became another brick in the wall I was building between who I was and who I was becoming. Then came the pandemic. Overnight, the world froze, but hospitals didn't. They were desperate for faster supply chains, better tracking, more efficiency, and suddenly, Medlink wasn't just a small startup. It was the lifeline people needed. We partnered with local clinics first, then major hospitals, then entire states. Orders poured in faster than we could handle. For months, I slept in the office, using my jacket as a pillow. But for the first time, I wasn't surviving, I was leading. By the end of that year, Medlink had expanded to 30 states, managing thousands of deliveries a day. Investors who once ignored me now begged to schedule meetings. And one morning, I woke up to an email from a major healthcare conglomerate offering an acquisition deal, $120 million. I stared at the number for a long time. It didn't feel real. I had built something from nothing, something the world now valued more than I ever thought it would value me. That afternoon, when the contract was signed, my name appeared in a small column on Forbes' website, Forbes 30, Under 30, Healthcare Innovation, Isabelle Carter, founder of Medlink. I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just sat there in the quiet office, surrounded by screens, thinking how strange it was that I had finally created something that made people see me, yet the people I wanted most to see me probably wouldn't care. Still, I called home that evening. It had been nearly a year since we'd last spoken. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice polite but distant, like a receptionist. "Oh, Isabelle. How are you?" "I'm good, Mom," I said. "Actually, really good. The company's doing great. We were acquired today." "That's nice, honey," she said, the same tone she'd used when I fixed my first radio. "I'm glad you're keeping busy. Your sister just got promoted at her firm, you know? She's doing so well." I forced a laugh. "That's great, tell her congrats. Oh, and don't forget, Christmas is coming up. Chloe's hosting this year. We'll see how many people she can fit at her table." I hung up after a few more pleasantries, the same emptiness blooming in my chest. It didn't matter how many millions were in my bank account, or how many headlines carried my name. To them, I was still the unnecessary child, still the one standing just outside the frame. That night, I went for a drive through the city. The streets were quiet, lined with palm trees swaying in the coastal wind. My phone kept lighting up with messages, congratulations from journalists, former classmates, even investors who once doubted me. I answered none of them. I just kept driving until the city lights blurred and the ocean came into view. I parked near the cliffs, turned off the engine, and listened to the waves. The air smelled of salt and rain. I thought about that girl in the Indiana garage, whispering to herself that she mattered. She had been right. But she didn't know that success, when it finally came, would be so lonely. For a long time, I watched the horizon until the sky began to brighten, pale pink creeping over the water. I had everything I once thought would heal me: money, recognition, freedom, yet all I felt was the same quiet ache, the same invisible longing. In the end, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. Success doesn't fix what love broke. It only gives you the tools to build something new. I didn't know what that something was yet, but as I sat there watching the sun rise, I promised myself this time I wouldn't build it for anyone's approval. I'd build it for me. After the acquisition, I had more money than I ever imagined having, but no real place to belong. My apartment in Palo Alto was too small, too temporary. Every time I came home from another business dinner or award ceremony, it felt sterile, like walking into a hotel room that wasn't mine. There were flowers on the counter from investors, plaques on the shelves, and yet everything around me felt cold. One night, after another empty celebration, I opened my laptop and started looking at land listings in Colorado. Not because I wanted a mansion or a symbol of wealth, but because I wanted silence, the kind of silence that wasn't lonely, but peaceful. Aspen appeared almost by accident. The photos showed endless pines, snow-dusted peaks, and valleys that seemed to breathe on their own. Something about the mountains felt like truth, steady, unapologetic, quietly magnificent. A month later, I was standing there in person, boots sinking into untouched snow, the air so thin it burned my lungs. The realtor talked about property values, but I wasn't listening. I was looking at the light. The way it touched the frozen trees, the way it reflected off the glassy surface of a nearby pond. It felt like the first place in years that didn't expect me to prove anything. I bought it on the spot. The following year became my private act of creation. I designed the ranch myself, refusing to let a luxury architect decide what home should look like. I wanted it to feel alive, honest, built by hands that remembered what it was like to work in a cold Indiana garage. The main lodge rose from cedar and stone, its walls breathing with the scent of pine. Wide windows framed the mountain range like paintings, catching the golden light at sunrise and the silver shimmer of moonlight at night. The floors were oak, warm, textured, the kind that creaked softly under bare feet. In the living room, I built a fireplace large enough to swallow the coldest winter nights. The mantel was made from reclaimed barn wood, sanded smooth but still scarred with age. I filled the space with things that made me feel: handwoven blankets, candles that smelled faintly of cinnamon and smoke, books I'd loved as a child but never owned. And at the center of it all, under the vaulted ceiling and soft chandelier glow, I placed a table. Not just any table, a long, solid piece of walnut, 12 feet end to end, carved by a local craftsman. It took 3 months to make. Every knot in the wood told a story. When I ran my fingers across it for the first time, I thought of all the years I'd been told there wasn't enough room for me. This table was the answer. It had room for everyone. Outside, I built a wraparound porch where the snow would gather in soft drifts, and a stone path leading to a small greenhouse. There was a pond that froze in winter, perfect for ice skating, and in summer it shimmered like glass, reflecting the endless blue. I even installed a small speaker system under the rafters that played soft jazz in the evenings. Some nights, I'd stand by the window with a cup of tea, watching the snow fall, the fire crackling behind me, the faint scent of pine and amber filling the air. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. I didn't post photos of it. I didn't tell my family. Not even Chloe. On social media, I let people think I still lived in California. The ranch wasn't for display, it was my secret cathedral. Every board, every candle, every window was a prayer to the girl who once sat at the kids' table, waiting for someone to look her way. This was her sanctuary. When spring came, the mountains bloomed. The snow melted into streams that trickled past the edge of the property. Wildflowers covered the meadows, bursts of violet and gold swaying in the breeze. I'd wake up early just to hear the sound of the birds echoing through the valley. Some days, I'd sit by the pond with my laptop, working remotely, my dog curled beside me, the smell of fresh grass mixing with coffee. Every part of it felt earned, not bought-built. One evening, as the sun began to set, the entire sky turned to rose gold. The light poured through the windows, scattering across the long table. I set a single plate there, my dinner, simple and quiet, and realized how different the silence felt now. It wasn't empty anymore, it was full. Full of effort, of memory, of everything I had endured to reach this point. I thought about my family, about all the Christmases spent watching Chloe unwrap gifts while I cleared the plates. For years, I believed that if I could just succeed enough, maybe they'd let me sit beside them. But as the firelight flickered against the walls, I finally understood something. I didn't need to sit at their table. I had built my own. The world outside was covered in white. I walked out onto the porch, wrapped in a wool blanket, and looked up at the sky. The stars were sharp and endless, brighter than they had any right to be. The cold bit at my cheeks, but I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten child, the sister, the outsider. The ranch glowed behind me, warm and alive, the table at its heart shining softly in the firelight. I smiled to myself, feeling the mountain air fill my lungs, and whispered into the night. I was no longer the outsider. The first snow of December came early that year, blanketing the ranch in a quiet silver stillness. I'd just finished hanging a string of lights along the porch when my phone buzzed. It was a group chat notification, our family one. The name hadn't changed in years, Carter Family Christmas. I hesitated before opening it, already knowing what I'd find. Sure enough, my mother's message sat at the top. This year, just Chloe's family, keeping it small. I stared at those same 8 words, the ones that had once sliced through me like glass. I'd built an entire life, an entire world, trying to move beyond them. But seeing them again so casual, so thoughtless brought back every old echo. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just watched the snow fall outside my window, each flake catching light from the cabin lanterns. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Rachel. Rachel was my cousin, 2 years older than me. We'd been close as kids, sneaking cookies at Grandma's, whispering jokes under the Christmas table, but life had pulled us apart. Her last text to me had been almost 5 years ago, a simple, "Hope you're doing okay." When she answered, her voice cracked a little from surprise. "Isabelle? Oh my God, I didn't think you still had my number." I smiled faintly. "Guess I still do. How have you been?" We exchanged small talk at first: jobs, cities, the polite things people say when they're not sure where to begin. But then she sighed, and her tone softened. So, I'm guessing you got the Christmas text too? My chest tightened. You mean? Yeah, she said bitterly. Apparently it's just Chloe and her family this year. Keeping it small. Mom's furious. Grandma doesn't even know yet. She's gonna be heartbroken. It's not Ming. I sank into the couch, feeling a mix of disbelief and recognition. I thought maybe it was just me. That they? No, Izzy, she interrupted, her voice trembling. It's not just you, it's everyone. Uncle Eli, Aunt May, even the twins. None of us got an invite. They said it's too crowded, but you know what that means. We both fell silent for a moment, listening to the static of the line. Somewhere in the background, I heard Rachel sniffle. Grandma said she'd never seen Christmas get this small. She told me last night she felt erased. That word hung in the air. Erased. That was exactly it. It wasn't about distance or logistics. It was about being invisible in a family that chose who mattered. When we finally hung up, I sat in the dim glow of the fire, the sound of wind brushing against the windows. The snow kept falling, heavy and relentless, but for once, it didn't feel suffocating. It felt cleansing, like it was covering something old and rotten, making space for something new. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Rachel's voice, about Grandma's sadness, about all the people who had been quietly pushed aside year after year. The ones who always brought gifts no one opened, who showed up early and left late, cleaning up after everyone else. I realized something then: this wasn't just my story, it was our story. And maybe, just maybe, I could change how it ended. The next morning, I made coffee, sat by the window, and started dialing. First was Uncle Eli. He laughed when he heard my voice. Well, if it isn't the family's ghost, I thought you'd moved to Mars. Almost, I said, smiling. Listen, Eli, did you get invited to Christmas this year? The pause told me everything. Nope, just Chloe and her crew. Why? Because, I said quietly, I'm planning something different this year. My place, Aspen. No rules. No favorites. Everyone's welcome. But no Bursid prize bidder. There was a long silence on the other end, followed by the sound of him clearing his throat. You serious? Completely. Izzy, his voice cracked. You have no idea how much that means. Count me in. I made another call, then another. Aunt May cried when she heard the invitation. You're the first person to ask me to Christmas in 5 years, she said, her voice trembling. Even the twins, now teenagers, begged to help decorate. Each call was like lighting a candle in a dark room one by one, the space filled with warmth. By the time I finished, the list had grown longer than I expected. Cousins, aunts, uncles, a few old family friends who drifted away after years of quiet exclusion. People who used to hover at the edge of family photos, now given a chance to stand in the center. When I finally set the phone down, the fire in the hearth had burned low, just glowing embers. Outside, the mountains shimmered under the moonlight, and I realized my heart felt lighter than it had in years. Not because of revenge, but because of connection. For so long, I'd believed healing meant leaving the past behind. But maybe, sometimes, healing means inviting others who were hurt too and giving them a place to belong. Over the next few days, messages started flooding in. Photos of people smiling through tears. A voice note from Grandma, shaky but full of life. Oh, Isabelle, thank you, dear. I never thought I'd see the whole family together again. You're bringing back something we lost a long time ago. As I listened to her voice, I looked at the long wooden table in my lodge, still empty but waiting. I imagined it filled with laughter, light, and all the people who had once been made to feel small. The table I built for myself was about to become something much bigger: our table. That night, as the snow fell heavier and the ranch glowed like a lantern against the dark, I whispered to myself, let's build a Christmas they'll never forget. And with that, the quiet rebellion began. Not loud, not cruel, just a gathering of hearts long ignored. A revolution made of kindness, built one phone call at a time. The following morning, I woke up before dawn. The air inside the ranch was still and cold, the kind of silence that carries possibility. Outside, the mountains shimmered under a pale pink horizon. I stood there for a moment, coffee in hand, letting the stillness sink in before I reached for my notebook and began to plan. If I was going to bring everyone together, it couldn't just be another dinner. It had to mean something, a celebration for every person who had ever been left out, dismissed, or forgotten. This Christmas would be proof that being excluded once didn't mean you had to stay outside forever. I called Margaret first, a retired chef who had once run a small inn in Aspen before closing it to care for her husband. I met her by chance at the local market earlier that year, and we had instantly connected. She had this gentle laugh and hands that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and butter. When I told her what I was planning, she paused for a long moment, then said, "You're not hosting a dinner, Isabelle. You're hosting redemption." That line stayed with me. Together, we designed the menu: roast duck glazed with cranberry orange, rosemary lamb, and 3 different kinds of pie. Margaret insisted on baking everything from scratch, because people taste sincerity. I smiled at that. I wanted sincerity everywhere, in the food, in the air, in every inch of the ranch. Over the next week, the quiet cabin turned into something alive. Boxes of decorations arrived from the small craft stores in town: garlands of dried oranges and pine cones, old-fashioned glass ornaments, strings of warm fairy lights. I spent evenings hanging them one by one, the scent of pine mixing with the faint sweetness of vanilla candles. The fireplace burned constantly, filling the lodge with a soft golden glow. When snow fell outside, it looked like the world itself was wrapped in stillness and light. I wanted every guest to feel seen. So, I started creating personalized gifts, small, simple things that carried meaning. For Rachel, I found an old Polaroid photo of us as kids, sitting under Grandma's Christmas tree, and framed it with a note that said, "Some memories deserve to come home." For Uncle Eli, who loved carpentry but never had tools of his own, I bought a set engraved with his initials. For Grandma, I commissioned a local artist to paint her childhood farmhouse from an old black and white picture. Every present was like a piece of my past, fragments I was finally reassembling into something whole. At night, I'd sit by the window wrapping each gift, the paper rustling softly, the snow whispering against the glass. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I wasn't doing it for forgiveness. I was doing it because this was how I wanted to remember myself, not as the girl who was forgotten, but as the woman who learned how to give without asking for permission. Margaret arrived 3 days before Christmas, bundled in a red scarf and carrying a box of cookies still warm from the oven. She took one look around and smiled. "You built this all yourself?" I nodded. She let out a low whistle. "You didn't just build a house, sweetheart. You built a haven." Together, we spent hours preparing setting tables, arranging candles, polishing glasses until they gleamed. The long walnut table in the center of the room became the heart of it all. I ran my hand along its surface, thinking of every Christmas I had spent at the kids' table, every time my name hadn't been called. This time, there would be only one table, long, open, and ready for everyone. By Christmas Eve morning, the ranch looked like something out of a storybook. The scent of roasted herbs drifted through the air. The windows glowed with warm light against the snow outside. Margaret hummed softly in the kitchen as she basted the lamb. I lit candles along the staircase and placed holly branches on every windowsill. The air vibrated with quiet anticipation, not the tense kind that used to fill my family's house, but something gentler, honest, almost holy. Before the guests arrived, I stepped outside for a moment. The cold bit at my skin, the kind of cold that makes you feel awake, present. The mountains towered around me, ancient and silent. I thought about how far I'd come, from the girl sitting in the garage with a broken radio to the woman standing on a mountain surrounded by everything she'd built herself. The contrast made me laugh softly under my breath. Maybe this was what healing looked like, not fireworks or grand gestures, but quiet acts of creation. When I went back inside, I placed the last ornament on the tree, a small wooden heart engraved with the words, "You belong." I hung it right in the center where the lights would hit it just so, and for a moment, I felt that same warmth I had been chasing my whole life. Margaret walked in and caught me standing there. "Nervous?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "Not nervous. Ready. I do." She smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. "Then let's make some magic, Isabelle." Is sighed at sitter. That night, as the fire crackled and the first guests began to arrive, their cars crunching softly over the snow-covered driveway, I looked around the glowing room and felt something inside me settle. Every flicker of light, every wrapped gift, every note of the soft music playing in the background was a piece of who I used to be, finally finding its place. I realized I wasn't hosting this Christmas to prove anything to the family that had once left me out. I was doing it to prove something to the girl I used to be, the one who sat in the garage, who whispered to herself, "You matter." And as the door opened and Rachel stepped inside, her face lighting up at the sight of the warmth and the smell of home, I felt it clearly. This wasn't revenge. This was redemption. Every candle, every plate, every smile was a stitch in the fabric of healing. This time, I wasn't giving to be accepted. I was giving because I finally knew how. The snow began falling heavier by evening, blanketing the ranch in silver light. Inside, every candle flickered to life, the fire roared in the hearth, and the scent of roasted rosemary and cinnamon filled the air. Margaret moved gracefully through the kitchen, humming softly while basting the lamb, her laughter mingling with the faint tune of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas" drifting from the record player. I stood by the front window for a moment, watching the headlights appear one by one down the long, winding driveway, tiny halos of light cutting through the snow. My chest tightened, not from nerves, but from something deeper, the strange ache that comes when you realize the moment you've been waiting for your whole life is finally here. The first to arrive was Rachel. She burst through the door, shaking snow from her coat, eyes wide as she looked around the warm glow of the lodge. "Isabelle," she whispered, her voice breaking. This is unbelievable." I pulled her into a hug, and she held me tighter than she ever had before. One by one, the others followed. Uncle Eli with a small wooden carving he'd made for the table's centerpiece, Aunt May carrying pies still warm under foil, the twins laughing as they dragged their sleds onto the porch. Even Grandma, wrapped in her old fur coat, stepped inside slowly, her breath catching as she looked around. "Oh, my heart," she murmured, tears glimmering in her eyes. "For the first time, it feels like Christmas again." The room filled quickly with the sound of voices, people greeting one another after years of silence, laughter spilling into the air, glasses clinking, the rustle of coats and boots and snowflakes melting into the rugs. The long walnut table that had once stood empty now glowed with light, evergreen garlands weaving down the center, candles reflecting in the polished surface, plates set for everyone, and I meant everyone. There was no children's table tucked into a corner, no separation, no hierarchy, just one long, endless stretch of belonging. As the fire crackled, Grandma raised her glass. Her voice, though old, carried strength. "For the first time," she said softly, looking around at the faces lit by candlelight, "we feel like we belong." The room fell silent. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the applause came, gentle at first, then swelling, laughter mixing with tears. I felt the warmth rise in my chest, a quiet, steady bloom that melted years of cold away. Margaret brought out the roast duck, the golden skin glistening under the lights, and the room erupted into conversation again. People passed dishes, poured wine, shared stories of old Christmases gone wrong and right. Someone played with the record player until the soft notes of Silent Night filled the air. Without prompting, voices began to join in, one by one at first, then all together. Rachel's voice was thin but trembling with emotion. Grandma sang in harmony, her hands clasped in mine. "Silent night, holy night." The song carried through the house like a prayer. For a moment, everything, the years of neglect, the bitterness, the loneliness, seemed to dissolve into the air. All that remained was warmth, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. I looked around the table and realized something almost impossible. Every single person was smiling. Not the polite smiles of forced gatherings, but the kind born from peace. Halfway through the song, I noticed Grandma reaching for my hand again. "You did this, Isabelle," she whispered. "You brought us back." I wanted to answer, but my throat closed up. All I could do was nod, tears slipping down my cheeks. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a guest at someone else's table. I felt seen. Completely, finally seen. After dinner, Rachel stood to take a picture, all of us together, side by side, with the fire behind and the snow swirling outside the window. She sent it to the old family group chat, the one Mom had used to send that message weeks earlier. Within minutes, the typing dots appeared, Mom typing, Dad typing, Chloe typing. Then, one by one, the reactions popped up. A heart emoji. Then another. And another. The group chat, dead for years, began to flicker back to life. But it didn't stop there. Someone shared the photo to Facebook, tagging everyone. Within hours, comments began pouring in. "What a beautiful Christmas. This looks like joy. You can feel the love in that photo. Was there Isabelle no made?" The next morning, when I opened my phone, I saw that even people from our old town in Indiana had shared it. The photo had spread like wildfire, not because of fame or extravagance, but because of something real. You could see it in every face around that table, the light, the laughter, the redemption. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stayed awake by the fire. The candles had burned low, and the air was thick with the smell of pine and cider. I looked at the table now, covered with crumbs, half-empty glasses, and melted wax, and felt something deep inside me settle. For years, I'd chased success, thinking it would fill the emptiness of being unseen. But sitting there, surrounded by the remnants of the most genuine Christmas I'd ever known, I realized it wasn't success that healed the wound. It was connection. The act of giving. Of creating space for others who had been left behind, just like me. The fire popped softly, throwing sparks into the air. I leaned back in my chair and smiled through the quiet tears. For the first time in my life, the little girl who had once sat at the kids' table wasn't waiting to be called over. She had called everyone else instead, and this time, no one was left outside. The morning after the dinner, the ranch was bathed in soft white light. Snow still drifted gently outside, and the smell of coffee and cinnamon lingered in the air. The guests were slowly waking up, their laughter echoing faintly down the hall. I stood by the kitchen window, holding a mug in both hands, watching the light stretch across the mountains. It should have been perfect, peaceful, quiet, whole. But then my phone started to buzz. One call. Then another. Then another. Mom. Dad. Chloe. Their names flashed one after another across the screen, over and over, until I finally sighed and answered. "Hello?" Mom's voice came sharp and fast, the way it always did when she felt cornered. "Isabelle, what on earth did you do?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Don't play innocent," she snapped. "You know exactly what I mean. That photo all over social media, everyone's talking about it. Your cousins, your aunts, even people from church. You made it look like we excluded everyone. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" I blinked, stunned. For a moment, I couldn't even find words. "Made it look like?" I repeated softly. "Mom, you did exclude everyone. You said it yourself, keeping it small." There was a pause, then Dad's voice cut in, rough and defensive. "That message was private, Isabelle. You didn't need to turn it into a spectacle. You've always had a flair for drama. Now you've embarrassed your mother and this family in front of the whole town." Something in me trembled, not with fear, but disbelief. "Embarrassed you?" I said quietly. "All I did was invite people who were hurt. I didn't post anything." "Rachel did." Mom interrupted. "And everyone knows it was at your ranch. You planned this whole thing to make us look bad. How could you be so?" Her voice cracked, but not from sadness, from anger. The kind that hides guilt behind control. I turned slowly toward the living room, where Grandma was sitting by the fire, her cane resting against the armchair. She looked up at me with kind, knowing eyes. I didn't have to say anything, she just nodded. "Mom," I said, steadying my voice, "I'm putting you on speaker." There was a pause. What? Why? But I'd already pressed the button. Go ahead, I said softly. Grandma's here. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear the crackle of the fire. Then Grandma spoke, her voice quiet but cutting, every word carrying the weight of decades. Linda, she said, using my mother's name, for the first time I could remember. I've listened to you talk like this since Isabelle was a child. Every year, you've found ways to make her small so Chloe could shine brighter. And you've convinced yourself that was love. Mother, this is not your business. Oh, it's exactly my business, Grandma interrupted, her tone firm. Because I've watched this family rot from the inside out, pretending favoritism was tradition. Pretending cruelty was just how things are. Isabelle didn't humiliate you, dear. She exposed the truth, a truth you built with your own hands. Mom gasped. That's not fair. Grandma leaned forward, her voice rising, trembling with conviction. Fair? If fairness existed, she wouldn't have had to build a new table. The words hit, like thunder, even the fire seemed to hush. No one spoke for a long moment. I felt my throat tighten, my eyes sting. I turned away, pretending to stir the coffee just so I wouldn't have to wipe my tears in front of her. Dad cleared his throat. This is ridiculous, he muttered. We did our best for both girls. No, Grandma said sharply. You did your best for one. The other learned to survive on scraps, and she turned those scraps into gold while you weren't watching. The line went quiet again. I could hear Mom's shaky breathing. You're twisting everything, she whispered. We love Isabelle. Grandma sighed, her voice softening but no less firm. You love her when it's convenient. But love isn't supposed to make one child invisible. And now that she's standing in her own light, you can't stand the reflection. For the first time, I heard something new in Mom's silence, not anger, not pride, but confusion. The kind that comes when the truth finally pierces through denial. She didn't respond, neither did Dad. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of years pressing against my chest. I didn't build this place to hurt anyone, I said finally. I just wanted a Christmas where everyone felt like they belonged. That's all I ever wanted to belong. No one answered, just breathing, faint and uneven on the other end. Then the call disconnected. I set the phone down slowly. For a moment, I didn't move. Grandma reached across the table, her wrinkled hand finding mine. Her touch was warm, grounding. You don't need to fight anymore, sweetheart, she said softly. The truth spoke for itself today. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat burned, and the tears I'd been holding finally spilled over. Not because of pain, but because, for the first time in my life, someone else had said the words I'd been too afraid to say. I looked out the window. The snow was falling again, thick and steady, blanketing the ranch in pure white. Behind me, the fire crackled, soft and alive. For the first time, I felt completely free. I reached over, turned off the phone, and whispered into the quiet, let the silence be theirs now. Thanks for watching. The days that followed were quiet, not the hollow kind of quiet that used to fill the house back in Indiana, but the peaceful kind that feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world blanketed in pure white. Inside the ranch, the air was still warm with traces of cinnamon, pine, and laughter. The long table, now half cleared, half cluttered, looked like a painting of life itself. Coffee cups left mid-conversation, crumpled napkins beside melting candles, the aftermath of belonging. I sat there one morning, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed a new group chat notification. The name caught my breath, Aspen Christmas Family. Rachel had created it overnight. Inside were dozens of messages, photos from the night before, voice notes full of laughter, little hearts reacting to Grandma's toast. Someone had written, "We haven't felt this close in years." Another said, "Can we make this our new tradition?" Even Uncle Eli, who barely texted, had written, "Next year, I'll bring the chairs I'm making. That table deserves to grow." I smiled, reading through every message. It wasn't just a chat. It was proof that healing could spread. That when one person dares to build something out of pain, others find shelter in it too. A few minutes later, a private text came through from Rachel. "You didn't just host Christmas, Izzy. You gave us back our family." And another, from Grandma. "You've done what I always prayed for. You turned hurt into home." I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the words, feeling tears rise again, but this time, they didn't sting. They felt warm, cleansing. By afternoon, the guests had left. Margaret hugged me goodbye, promising to return next year, whether you invite me or not. I laughed, watching her car disappear down the snowy path, her red scarf fluttering in the wind. The ranch fell back into its gentle rhythm, the creak of the wood floors, the faint crackle of embers, the whisper of snow against the windows. But one thought lingered. My parents, Chloe. For days, I tried to push it away, telling myself that silence was enough, that I didn't owe them anything. But healing, I was learning, isn't about winning. It's about closing the circle. So, a week later, I wrote a message, short, simple. Dinner, Saturday. 6 p.m. Just us. I didn't expect them to respond. But on Saturday evening, as the last light faded behind the mountains, headlights appeared in the distance. 3 sets. My heart tightened. When they walked in, the air shifted awkward at first, careful. Mom looked around, her eyes catching the glow of the candles, the garlands still hanging from the beams. "It's beautiful here," she said quietly. Dad nodded but said nothing. Chloe lingered near the door, unsure whether to smile or apologize. I didn't ask them to. I just led them to the table. Dinner was simple soup, roast chicken, apple pie Margaret had left in the freezer. No speeches, no pretending. The conversation was hesitant at first, comments about the snow, the view, the food. But then, slowly, something changed. The pauses between sentences grew shorter, the smiles more real. For the first time, they didn't talk at me. They talked to me. Mom eventually set her fork down. Her hands trembled slightly. "You've built something special, Isabelle," she said, her voice low. "I don't think we ever understood how much we took for granted." Dad added softly, "You did good, kid." It wasn't the apology of storybooks, no tears, no dramatic confessions, but it was honest. And that was enough. When they left, Chloe hugged me at the door. "I used to think you were trying to compete with me," she said, her eyes glistening. "Now I see, you were just trying to find peace." I smiled faintly. Maybe both. After they drove off, I stood on the porch, the snow falling gently around me. The world was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned. Inside, the table glowed in the firelight, the same table that had once symbolized loneliness, now shimmering with the memory of laughter and healing. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat down, and opened my journal. The pen hovered over the page for a moment before I began to write. This year, I wasn't invited to the family table. So, I built my own. And when it was ready, I opened it to everyone who needed a place to belong. I have built my own table. I set the pen down, closed the notebook, and looked out at the snow falling steady and soft beyond the window. The light from the fire flickered against the glass, reflecting a face I finally recognized, not the girl who once waited by the door, but the woman who had learned that love doesn't need permission. Because the truth is, you don't need anyone's approval to have worth. And the wounds that once marked you aren't the end of your story, they are the fuel that teaches you how to build something new. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing old footprints and leaving only white, a blank slate, a quiet promise. And inside that silence, I smiled, knowing that for the first time, my table would always be full.